So today let's look at the state of comedy in our culture, the cycles of cultural games that we play, and the idea of sacred cows. You've probably seen something like this already, but Family Guy is going to be phasing out their gay jokes. Now, if you've watched Family Guy for any amount of time, you know that's one of their staples. One of their meat and potatoes is just jokes. They're not spiteful, they're not cruel, they're not mean, but they make a lot of jokes about the gays. Even the little baby character is this confused kind of closet homosexual. And you might think, boy, why is that? Like, why? And I've done videos on how comedy is now, politicians are funnier than comedians. You know, you can see it with a lot of things, too. You see, like, Jimmy Fallon apologizing for some very minor misstep. In fact, it's difficult to even understand what he did wrong. But you see what used to be celebrated as the irreverence of comedy. Now you see these guys walking on eggshells. You see them just always saying sorry. Like, look at the shock jock like Howard Stern. He's out issuing apologies. I mean, the guy made his name. His whole living is he'll say anything. He'll offend anyone. He doesn't care. You can look at, I guess she calls herself a comedian, the online personality Jenna Marbles. And she's crying because she did tanning or something, and it kind of looked like blackface, and people started piling on her, and she goes, I never meant to offend anybody. Well, she's done videos where she gets drunk in a bathtub. What happens if some conservative Christian reached out to her and said, you know, young lady, I don't think that's fitting of a young woman. You should be more responsible. Like, she wouldn't have said, well, I don't mean to offend anyone. You did, and you didn't care. In fact, these people always meant to offend people. In fact, that's the very game. That's what got her kind of popular in the first place. And then it's important to notice what is off limits. Family Guy won't joke about the gays anymore. Well, Saturday Night Live, for the first time, won't poke fun at the president. They won't poke fun at Biden. And wow, really? SNL won't mock this old guy falling upstairs? Because why? I mean, it's ripe for comedy. Because they're not trying to do comedy. A content creator named Anomaly made a really good point. He said, today's mainstream comedians are going for applause, not laughs. They want to preach to the choir. They want everyone, yay, you nailed them. It's not humor. They're not going for funny. They're going for hell yeah, which seems a subtle difference at first, but it is a very different game. We've seen you can't make jokes about the trans. You can't even criticize them remotely. J.K. Rowling has made some very reasonable, logical points, and yet she went from being at the top of the cultural hierarchy to her own fans burn her books. And so I want to get you thinking about this idea of games. There was a very interesting lecturer in the 60s and 70s named Alan Watts, who gave a lot of kind of like Eastern philosophy, but he talked about life as a series of games that we play. And we as adult human beings, we always play games. There's always a game going on. And there's bigger games, there's smaller games, and then there's grand cultural games. Give you an example of what I mean. Think about your office. There's probably someone in there who's playing the game, I'm working harder than you are. And they have all the trappings, they have all the behaviors, they're stressed out, they're looking at the people that are working less hard and just exasperated. But there is certain people in your office that play, I'm working harder than you every single day. Now, there's also a person in your office that's probably playing, I'm the laziest person here. And day in and day out, they come in and they play the game, I'm the laziest person here. In your neighborhood or on your block, there's probably someone playing, my family is happier than your family. Look at the pictures from our vacation. We went to France. We went to Disney World. We went to Hawaii. Look at us all smiling and having fun. Meanwhile, they can't even hang out at a barbecue without getting in an argument. But they're trying to play the game where a better family than you, or we're happier. You know people, like, you get these games, and these games are deadly serious. We don't just idly play them as a pastime. We take our games seriously. Look at a very old one. Look back at like Three Musketeers time. There was a game that adults played back then called I Have More Honor Than You. What a weird game, right? These games, when you look back on them, they never make any sense, too. They seem ridiculous. Think about the game, though, I Have More Honor Than You. Did you insult my honor? I challenge you to a duel. And these people would fight to the death, like pistols or rapiers, and despite how the movies cleaned things up, that had to be pretty gruesome. You probably didn't get away scot-free on either side, and if you won, the guy that was left over was probably a horrible mess. It wasn't a clean anything, but people would fight for the death to win the game I Have More Honor Than You. Well, what happened with this game is more and more people were intimidated, scared into silence. Don't offend that guy's honor, he's crazy. Or people were killed, and for every person that dies, you have a mother, you have a father, a friend, family member, children. People get hurt by these games that are left over. And so for every duel, there's 100 people that are miserable from the game I Have More Honor Than You. Until it gets to a point where it's so intolerable, people are just like, look, we're not going to play I Have More Honor Than You. And then it flips. It's like this sine wave. You know, it goes up, goes up, goes up. The stock market does this too. You get this mania, this hysteria, and then it crashes and nobody wants anything to do with it. My friend's dad bought a stock called Cisco Systems in the late 90s. Everyone was buying Cisco Systems. It went up, 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 and then it crashed. And 20 years later, that's how long it took for his investment to get back to break even. He didn't make a dime on it. Once these games crash, they don't ever really come back into style. At least not in living memory. Take my grandparents' generation. Like, the games do have a point, but we have to realize when we're playing them. So everyone in my grandparents' time was involved in World War II. And the big question people would ask each other after the war was, what did you do? Where were you? Because there was some real heroes back in those days, and they needed them. And so the game my grandparents played was, I'm more patriotic than you are. And we have the most subtle means of one-upmanship. You know, a good game played with style was very cool, and they didn't, there was good form and there was bad form. Good form would be having a flag out on your garage door that you bring in each night, roll it up very carefully and bring it inside. Bad form would be like a red, white, and blue top hat and red, white, and blue pants and jumpsuit and the whole thing. And so the game has very intricate rules. Well, what happened? Well, the game got old. It became sacred. It became this sacred cow. You could not criticize America. America won World War II. And so people took advantage of that. What happened was you got Vietnam. Don't you love your country? Take that hill kind of thing. And it'll make a man out of you. And so the game I'm More Patriotic Than You, all these kids were rounded up and sent off to war to get ground up on Hamburger Hill. And it was pointless, right? But nobody could criticize it because being patriotic became a sacred cow, because it was the pinnacle of being a patriot, of the game I'm More Patriotic Than You. And nothing is more patriotic than going off to war. You couldn't say, I'm not sending my son or daughter to that. I'm not voting for a politician that supports that pointless war. And so what happened is people really started getting hurt. The game outlived its usefulness. And you had horrible, the Huey helicopters and all that. People took advantage of the game. Racketeers, warmongers, this whole thing sprung up. But what you had was people suffered. They suffered tremendously. The loss of a son in battle, or the poor Vietnamese and all that. Like, people got so sick of the game, I'm more patriotic than you, there was a total revulsion. So what happened? Well, like a sine wave, it flipped, and people started playing a new game. And so what happens is, what is the winning hand? What is the highest pinnacle of goodness in a previous game? When a new game is manifest, that highest position becomes the lowest position. So what was the new game? Well, it was kind of the hippy dippy trippy game. The game of, I'm more far out than you are. Far out, man. All of a sudden, the super patriotic 18-year-old that was going over to Nam and doing his duty, serving his country, he'd come back and they'd spit on him. He's at the bottom of the hierarchy. And the guy that's walking around barefoot with long hair and just doing drugs, smoking dope and dropping acid, that was the new idol. That was the guy that people were like, yeah, that's the guy. He's winning the game. And so you can see the people playing the new game just having pure spite and disrespect for people playing the old game. But the old game was aging out. The old game had these sacred cows that you couldn't criticize, but of course they need to be criticized. Sacred cows need to be criticized because all they do is age and suffer. And so you got this very necessary, very reasonable anti-war movement, and it got extremely powerful. But then it began to have problems like, oh, free love is great. Yeah, you just kind of do whatever you feel like, and Jenny is pregnant. Well, now we need a doctor. Now we need someone with some actual medical training. Now we need the system. We need the infrastructure. We need the medicine. We need the corporations. And so the game kind of fell apart. It fell into disrepute. The dirty hippie. It got gross. There was people that suffered. There was people that grew up with very parents that had drug problems, or absent fathers, or people got venereal disease. All sorts of consequences from playing the game of, I'm more far out than you. Like, I know people that played the game pretty hard in the 70s, and you see the long-term effects of acid on somebody's mind. They're toast. They're still far out. Like, they're still playing I'm more far out than you. And they'll flash like the peace sign, man. It's like Austin Powers. He was at the very top, but then in the 90s when they unfreeze him and he's like, hey, peace, man. And everybody just laughs at him because he was at the bottom of that game. Because then it flipped again to a different game. And this is the game people were playing as I was growing up. In the 80s and 90s, you're probably pretty familiar with it. It was called, I'm a better Christian than you are. And it's not like that. There's always been this game. People are always playing different games, but it is what is the most dominant cultural game. And of course, at first, it kind of had a purpose. Returning to hard work, order, good morality, all these things helped us get out of the I'm more far out than you, which clearly didn't work. It became absurd. But rather than actually becoming good Christians, people became more judgmental. And that they started to make money off it. It became this like bully's hammer. They just, oh, that's not Christian. That's not Christian. You got the satanic panic of the 80s. It became hysterical. And everyone would say, we had you had this aunt or someone, and you'd be like, oh, look, little Johnny got a 3.7 in school this quarter. Like, isn't he doing well? And the aunt would be like, yeah, Jesus would have got a 4.0. Like, it became intolerable. We had neighbors when I was a kid. They had these meetings. They'd put up at the end of the street this big sign that said extreme faith. And they would pack the neighborhood with people. Where they would sit there, they'd go to church on Sunday, they'd go to church on Wednesday, and then Thursday they would have extreme faith, where they'd try to one-up each other on who believed in God more. And then, of course, the kids, one had problems with drugs. He got into M&M and ecstasy and all that, and the girl had a ton of intercourse out of wedlock. And even you had these shows, like these real sappy moralistic shows like Touched by an Angel. The I'm More Christian Than You was a very popular game back then. And what happened is it became so intolerable. It became so insufferable. I call them 90s Christians. What happened is it just kind of became a dirty word. When Dana Carvey came out with his character, the church lady, with the punchline, "Isn't that special?" Everybody just cheered. They were like, yes, like relief from this just constant, like continuous social judgment. It was just absurd and hysterical. Like, back in those days, Walmart and a lot of music stores, but they would censor certain books or censor certain music if it offended Christian sensibilities. We're not talking ancient history. We're talking like less than 25 years ago. And so then it was kind of this turning phrase, this turning word I've talked about. You have the church lady just mocking it. And people really got uptight about this. Like, there she's mocking the Christianity, or Dana, But it was so necessary. Well, and how did the I'm More Christian Than You game end? Well, it became generally intolerable. But once again, it was taken advantage by the Bush administration and used for war. And a lot of people that were playing I'm More Christian Than You were like, well, we can't criticize our Christian Republican president. And so we got the 2 wars in Iraq and Afghanistan that are still playing out today. And so you can see then, like the sine wave, the whole game flipped in on itself again, a complete inversion. And now being the white, straight Christian male is the very bottom of the new hierarchy, the new pyramid. People people just laugh. People are trying to kind of bring it back, but it's the reason it's running into resistance is because that game played out and people don't want a part of it. It grosses them out. Meanwhile, in the late 90s in particular, and again, had been played a while, but a new game was taking center stage in the culture. And it's the game we're playing today. And that game is called I'm More Tolerant Than You Are. And as soon as I say it, you can see it everywhere. Like, that's been the game. And at first that just meant, well, men and women should have equal rights. And people were like, yeah, sure, that sounds good. And blacks should have an equal chance as whites. And you're like, well, that sounds good too. But it's not about doing good in the world. See, it's about winning the game. It's who can get the most points. And the game is I'm more tolerant. So within the game, this all makes perfect sense. Like, it's like grabbing the gold coins in Mario, and it's like, oh, these are so valuable, these points. When in reality, once you shut the game off, you see how ridiculous grabbing those coins were. This is real life. There's no floating gold coins. But in the game, which is where we are now, of I'm More Tolerant Than You, all of this stuff starts to make sense. There's a reason Family Guy got so popular, because they were going against the Christian game, and they were playing the game I'm More Tolerant Than You Are. And by poking fun at homosexuals, what they were really doing was accepting them. But then, rather than realizing like a particular battle has been won, and to a certain degree it was necessary and good, these things now become sacred. They become beyond any sort of criticism at all. And so we see the same mania we see in every dying paradigm, every paradigm that's hit its apex point. You see people, instead of helping people, you now see more and more people getting hurt, more and more people, because the game becomes the rules become so strict, and it's always like, how can I one up the next guy? Well, I would let, a 4-year-old change its gender, and it's like, well, I would let our borders be completely open and let anyone who wants to come in here, regardless of any criminal history, and I would defund the police. And the other person's like, boy, I can't go against defund the police. Meanwhile, the wreckage across society is clear to see. It's been a disaster. But it's all under the close of this game, I'm More Tolerant Than You, so the people that are still trying to play to win and still want to keep playing, they've got to get crazier and crazier. This is why, the Harry Potter kids that got rich from J.K. Rowling's book now criticize her. And so it goes into that stage, and what we're going to see is a flip. Like, if you think these games don't flip, you're probably not very old. The games will flip, and like always, whatever is the pinnacle will be at the very bottom, and whatever's at the bottom will go to the top. And so there's the start of a new game. I see people playing it already, and I think it is moving to become the dominant cultural game of the future. And that game is, I'm doing more to save Western civilization than you are. And you can see, like, it's a very necessary step. And what it will do is it will take the person who's at the top going, you bigot. Oh, you're at the bottom, and everyone will kind of smugly nod and be like, oh, I just got called a bigot by an NPC. I must be doing something right because the rules have changed. And the people that will become very popular, and the people you see becoming very popular today, are actually playing the game, I'm saving Western civilization. And that's what's going to be big going into the future as this old game dies out. And it'll be very funny. It'll be the same cycle over and over and over, and you could see it, like these sacred cows. This is the reason Joe Biden is the president, or Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, these guardians of... they brought out Bill Clinton for some sort of women's empowerment thing. Bill Clinton? But he's a sacred cow, right? Like, these sacred cows, the fate of the sacred cow is not a good one. There's an author named V.S. Nepal who talks about the paradox of the respect that a sacred cow receives. He says that an ordinary ox is of concern to no one and is quickly put out of its agony. But a sacred cow, which is held in esteem because it fed this family's, the children and everything growing up, the sacred cow has to be solicitously guarded so that it can die an agonizing death without any interference. And I think that's what you see with the sacred cows. That's what you see at the apex point of these cultural games that we play, is these sacred cows are protected, but they just die these slow, painful deaths. Like, look at the neoliberal establishment. You've got LARP against the machine. Their message now lines up with Coca-Cola's corporate training. Those guys used to be rebels, man, It's just this, and you watch Joe Biden fall up those stairs, like one painful, and nobody can criticize him. Nobody, because if the comedians laughed at him and made jokes about him, he would have never gotten elected. I don't know how he did in the first place, but it's only because people are worshiping these cows, and it does nobody any favor. Once it's time, a thing's time has come, and it's time to move on. But keeping all this in mind, I always like to think about what is it I can do or you can do as a result of this information, that we're all playing games. Well, the first thing is bring some self-awareness to it. Realize that we as adults do play games, and you actually can't get out of it. Like, I can try to play the game. I don't play the games that everyone else plays, but then I have to studiously ignore mainstream this and not own a TV and not watch. I don't watch any sort of mainstream news. I don't read any mainstream articles, which I don't, but it becomes a game as well. So realize you play a game. Well, play better games. And play a game not for the approval of others, but for yourself. You can play a game, I'm going to be my best self, and get yourself into shape. Maybe you quit smoking or drink less. You can play the game I'm starting to play. I'm going to grow some of my own food because I'm into nutrition. And I thought, yeah, boy, it would be fun. I've got a small piece of property, very small, but those raised bed boxes take almost no space at all. Find games that bring meaning and joy into your life. Don't try to play these big, large cultural games that you can never win, that just bring endless frustration and anger. Play a better game. Play a local game. Play for fun. And you'll actually be happier. And above all else, don't worship any sacred cows.